There comes a quiet moment, often unnoticed by the world around you, when you realize that the fire that once drove you has softened into a strange stillness, and you begin to wonder why the hunger that once pushed you forward no longer speaks in the same voice. You remember how motivation used to feel like a force, almost a pressure inside the chest, urging you to become something more, to achieve, to accumulate, to prove, to arrive somewhere that always seemed just beyond the next horizon. And now, after what you might call a spiritual awakening, that force has loosened its grip. The goals that once thrilled you feel hollow. The ambitions that once defined you no longer light you up. And in the silence that follows, the mind rushes in with a troubling question. What is wrong with me? But this question itself is born from the very identity that is dissolving. Nothing has gone wrong. In fact, something profoundly right is unfolding. What you are experiencing is not the loss of motivation. It is the loss of false motivation. It is not the absence of purpose. It is the shedding of borrowed purposes that were never truly yours. The soul has not gone quiet. The ego has. For much of your life, motivation came from a sense of incompleteness. You were driven by the belief that something essential was missing and that the future held the key to your wholeness. The mind learned to say, when I achieve this, then I will feel worthy. When I acquire that, then I will feel safe. When others see me in a certain way, then I will finally be at peace. Motivation in that phase of life was fueled by comparison, by fear of falling behind, by the need to justify your existence through visible outcomes. And because it was rooted in the ego's endless appetite, it could never truly satisfy you. It could only keep you moving. Awakening changes the question entirely. It gently, sometimes painfully, reveals that the self you were trying to improve was never the real you. It shows you that awareness itself is already complete, already whole, already at peace. And when that realization begins to sink in, the old engines of striving naturally shut down. The mind interprets this as danger. It says, if I am not striving, I am failing. If I am not motivated, I am wasting my life. But the soul is not interested in constant motion. The soul is interested in truth. This is why so many people feel disoriented after awakening. The ego-based goals dissolve, but the deeper, soul-aligned direction has not yet fully revealed itself. It is a liminal space, a sacred pause, a kind of spiritual winter where the ground appears barren but is quietly preparing for a new form of life. In this space, the old motivations can no longer move you, yet the new ones have not fully formed. And the discomfort you feel is not emptiness, it is spaciousness, unfamiliar to a mind that has always defined itself by doing. The ego thrived on urgency. It needed constant projects, constant proof, constant becoming. The soul, by contrast, moves with quiet certainty. It does not shout. It does not rush. It does not bargain with the future. It knows. And when you begin to live from that knowing, motivation no longer comes from fear or lack. It arises from alignment. But alignment cannot be forced. It must be allowed. You may notice that activities you once enjoyed feel strangely flat, not because you are broken, but because you were doing them for reasons that no longer resonate. You were chasing validation, or distraction, or identity. Now, those motives feel transparent. You can see through them. And once seen through, they lose their power. The mind wants to replace them immediately with new goals, new labels, new spiritual ambitions. It wants to turn awakening into another achievement. But the invitation here is different. The invitation is to rest in being rather than doing, to listen rather than chase, to trust rather than push. This phase asks for patience, something the ego rarely mastered. It asks you to sit in the unknown without demanding immediate answers. It asks you to notice the subtle guidance that arises not as pressure, but as a quiet sense of rightness. Motivation after awakening does not feel like being driven by a whip. It feels like being drawn by a gentle current. And until you learn to recognize that current, the mind may interpret the calm as stagnation. Consider how nature operates. A tree does not strain to grow. It does not set 5-year plans or compare its height to the trees beside it. It responds to sunlight, to water, to the season it is in. In winter, it does not apologize for being still. It does not call itself unmotivated because it has no leaves. It trusts the intelligence that knows when to rest and when to bloom. You too are governed by that same intelligence, even when the mind forgets. After awakening, the old question of what should I do with my life begins to soften into a deeper inquiry. What wants to express itself through me now? This is a radically different orientation. It is not about imposing your will on life, but about cooperating with it. And cooperation requires listening. It requires stillness. It requires the humility to admit that not all movement is progress, and not all stillness is regression. The ego measured motivation by intensity. The soul measures it by authenticity. When you are aligned, action feels simple, even when it is challenging. There is less inner resistance, less drama, less need to prove. You act because it feels true, not because you are afraid of what will happen if you do not. This kind of motivation may appear quieter, but it is far more sustainable. It does not burn you out because it does not depend on anxiety or self-judgment to keep going. Many people mistake this transitional phase for depression or laziness, and while it is important to honor your mental and emotional health, it is equally important not to pathologize a spiritual recalibration. When the false self loosens its grip, there is often a period of grief. You may grieve the person you thought you had to be. You may grieve the dreams that once defined you. You may even grieve the struggle itself, because striving had become familiar, and familiarity can feel like safety. Let that grief be present. It is part of the healing. It is the psyche learning to release an old identity. There is also a deeper truth emerging here. You are not here to be constantly motivated. You are here to be awake. Motivation was never meant to be your master. It was meant to be a temporary tool. Awakening reveals that your worth is not contingent on productivity and your value is not measured by output. This realization can feel destabilizing in a culture that equates busyness with importance, but it is profoundly liberating to the soul. As you allow this phase to unfold, you may begin to notice a subtle shift. Interests return, but they are different now. They are less about accumulation and more about contribution. Less about image and more about impact. Less about becoming someone and more about expressing what you already are. You may feel called to create, to serve, to learn, or simply to be present in ways that once seemed insignificant. Yet these quieter callings carry a depth that the old ambitions never did. Trust that life is not withdrawing from you, it is reorienting you. The loss of ego-driven motivation is not a dead end, it is a doorway. Beyond it lies a way of living guided not by compulsion, but by clarity, not by fear, but by love. Not by the constant question of, am I enough yet, but by the settled knowing that you always were. In time, action will arise again, but it will come from a different place. It will feel less like pushing a heavy boulder uphill and more like walking in a direction that feels strangely obvious. You will still set intentions, still make choices, still engage with the world, but the inner tone will be different. There will be less tension around outcomes, less attachment to identity, less need to control how things unfold. You will discover that doing flows naturally from being, and that being does not require motivation to justify itself. So if you find yourself in this quiet, confusing space where the old drives have fallen away and nothing new seems to have replaced them yet, know that you are not lost. You are between stories. The old narrative of striving has ended, and the new narrative of alignment is still being written. Let yourself be here without judgment. Let yourself rest in awareness. Let the soul lead, even if it leads you first into stillness. Because from that stillness, a deeper movement will emerge, one that does not exhaust you, one that does not demand you be anything other than what you already are. And when you move from that place, you will not call it motivation anymore. You will call it truth in motion. And as this truth begins to settle more deeply into your awareness, you may notice something subtle yet profound happening beneath the surface of your daily life. The silence that once felt unsettling starts to feel like a refuge. The pauses between actions no longer appear empty. They begin to feel intelligent, intentional, alive. You realize that life is not withholding direction from you. It is teaching you how to receive it differently. The old way relied on force, on effort, on the belief that you had to chase meaning. The new way invites you to allow meaning to rise up from within, like a tide responding to the moon rather than a command. This is where the deepest misunderstanding often occurs. The mind assumes that without constant motivation, life will stagnate, that nothing meaningful will happen unless you push it into existence. But awakening reveals a different principle entirely. Life is already moving, already unfolding, already expressing itself through you. Your task is not to manufacture momentum, but to stop resisting the current that has always been there. When resistance dissolves, movement happens naturally. You may notice that your relationship with time changes during this phase. The future loses its hypnotic pull. The past loosens its grip. There is a growing intimacy with the present moment, not as a concept, but as a living experience. You begin to see that much of your former motivation was rooted in escaping the now. You were trying to outrun discomfort, to leapfrog over uncertainty, to secure a future self who would finally feel at ease. Awakening gently turns you back toward this moment and whispers that peace was never waiting ahead of you. It has always been available right here. This realization can feel almost too simple for a mind accustomed to complexity. The ego thrived on elaborate strategies and layered identities. The soul prefers simplicity because truth does not need embellishment. And in this simplicity, you may discover a new form of courage. The courage to remain present, even when there is no clear plan. The courage to trust awareness more than analysis. The courage to let life reveal itself one step at a time. There may still be days when the old conditioning resurfaces, when you judge yourself for not doing enough, for not wanting what others want, for not fitting neatly into the narratives you once followed. When this happens, notice the voice behind the judgment. It is the same voice that once told you you were not enough until you proved otherwise. Greet it with compassion, not resistance. It is losing its authority, and like any habit, losing its grip. It may grow louder for a time before it fades. What is emerging now is a quieter confidence, one not built on accomplishment, but on alignment. You begin to trust yourself not because you have all the answers, but because you are no longer afraid of not having them. You begin to sense that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And mysteries do not respond to force, they respond to presence. In this space, motivation transforms into inspiration. Inspiration literally means to be breathed into. It arrives not as pressure, but as invitation. You feel drawn rather than driven. You feel called rather than compelled. And sometimes the call is simply to rest, to heal, to integrate what has already been revealed. Integration is not inactivity. It is assimilation. It is the psyche learning how to live from a new center. You may also notice a softening of your relationship with others. Competition loses its appeal. Comparison feels increasingly irrelevant. You recognize that each person is moving according to their own level of awareness, their own timing, their own lessons. The urgency to prove yourself in relation to them dissolves. In its place arises a quiet respect for the unfolding of all life, including your own. This is where inner freedom begins to take root. Freedom not as the ability to do whatever you want, but as the release from needing your life to look a certain way in order to feel whole. Freedom from the tyranny of expectation. Freedom from the endless chase for external validation. Freedom from the belief that your value is measured by momentum. As this freedom deepens, you may find yourself acting again, but the actions feel different. They are lighter, they are more playful, they are infused with a sense of participation rather than control. You are no longer trying to bend life to your will, you are collaborating with it. And in this collaboration, effort becomes less strained, outcomes become less heavy, and joy becomes less conditional. There is a deep wisdom in this phase that cannot be rushed. Just as a seed must remain in darkness before it breaks through the soil, consciousness often needs a period of apparent stillness before it expresses itself in new form. If you try to force growth prematurely, you disturb the natural rhythm. Trust that what is true will rise when it is ready. The ego once told you that motivation was proof of life. Awakening shows you that awareness is life itself. From awareness, everything else flows. Creativity flows, service flows, love flows. And when these arise, they do so without exhaustion, without resentment, without the constant need for reward. So remain gentle with yourself here. This is not the end of your path, it is a refinement of it. You are learning how to live from essence rather than effort, from being rather than becoming. And as this way of living stabilizes, you will discover that what once felt like a loss of motivation was actually the clearing of space for a deeper, truer movement to emerge. In that movement, you are not trying to get somewhere else. You are allowing what you already are to move through the world. And that, quietly, effortlessly, is where real purpose lives. And as this deeper movement begins to stabilize within you, something remarkable starts to happen to your perception of effort itself. You notice that the body still moves, the mind still engages, decisions still arise, yet there is far less internal friction. The struggle that once accompanied every choice quietly recedes. You are no longer negotiating with yourself, no longer arguing with life about how things should be. Action emerges, but it emerges cleanly, without the heavy emotional residue of expectation and self-judgment. This is where many people become confused, because the world taught you that motivation must be dramatic to be real. It must feel urgent, intense, almost desperate. But the soul has no interest in desperation. Desperation belongs to the ego's belief in scarcity, scarcity of time, scarcity of worth, scarcity of opportunity. Awakening dissolves this belief slowly, layer by layer, until you begin to sense that life is not running out of anything. It is infinitely expressive, and you are one of its expressions. When you live from this awareness, the question, what should I do with my life, transforms into something far gentler and far more honest. What is life asking of me in this moment? Sometimes the answer is movement, sometimes it is rest, sometimes it is courage, sometimes it is compassion, and sometimes it is simply to stay present with what is, without trying to improve it. Each answer is equally sacred. None require motivation as the ego once defined it. You may also notice that the drive to label yourself begins to fade. You are less interested in defining who you are and more interested in experiencing what you are. Identity becomes fluid, spacious, adaptable. You realize that much of your former motivation was an attempt to stabilize an identity that was never meant to be fixed. You were trying to hold water in your hands, wondering why it kept slipping through your fingers. Awakening teaches you to relax your grip and let the water flow. There is a profound humility in this realization. Not the humility of feeling small or insignificant, but the humility of recognizing that life is larger than any story you tell about yourself. You are a participant in something vast, intelligent, and deeply loving, even when it challenges you. When you surrender the need to dominate that process, you begin to feel supported by it. At this stage, silence becomes a teacher, not the absence of sound, but the quiet awareness beneath thought. You begin to sense guidance not as words, but as resonance. Certain choices feel expansive, others feel constrictive. You learn to trust these subtle signals, even when they defy logic or social expectation. This trust is the birth of true inner authority, not authority imposed from outside, but authority that arises from alignment with your own being. And with this trust comes a new relationship with fear. Fear does not disappear, but it loses its power to dictate your life. You see it as a conditioned response rather than a command. You notice that fear often arises when the ego senses its relevance fading. Instead of obeying it, you listen beneath it to the deeper intelligence that remains calm even in uncertainty. This is where your energy begins to return, not in frantic bursts, but in steady, grounded presence. You are no longer leaking energy into resistance, comparison, or self-criticism. You conserve it naturally by living more honestly. And honesty, in this sense, means allowing yourself to be where you are without pretending to be somewhere else. You may find that you are drawn to simpler joys now. A conversation that feels real, work that feels meaningful rather than impressive, moments of solitude that nourish rather than isolate. These are not signs of shrinking ambition, they are signs of refined awareness. You are no longer seduced by excess because you have tasted sufficiency within. As this refinement continues, purpose stops feeling like a distant destination and starts feeling like a quality of presence. Whatever you do it more fully. Whatever you engage with less fragmentation. Purpose is no longer something you chase. It is something you bring with you. This is the quiet miracle of awakening. It does not turn you into someone else. It removes the barriers that prevented you from being yourself. And when those barriers fall, life moves through you with surprising grace. You discover that you were never meant to be endlessly motivated. You were meant to be awake, responsive, and alive. So let this unfolding continue without interference. Let the old definitions dissolve. Let the new rhythms establish themselves. You are not behind. You are not off track. You are recalibrating to a deeper truth, one where effort gives way to alignment, where striving gives way to trust, and where the absence of ego-driven motivation reveals the presence of something far more enduring, a life lived from the inside out. And as you rest more fully in this inside-out way of living, a gentle recognition dawns that nothing essential was ever lost in you. What fell away were the layers of striving that kept you from hearing your own inner rhythm. What dissolved were the borrowed desires that once shouted so loudly you mistook them for your true voice. Beneath all of that, something timeless remained, waiting patiently for the noise to quiet. That something is the same awareness that has always been looking through your eyes, breathing through your lungs, listening to these words not with effort, but with recognition. You begin to sense that life is no longer asking you to become more, but to remember more deeply. To remember that you are not here to chase meaning, but to allow meaning to express itself through your presence. The motivation you once relied upon was a substitute for trust. Now, trust is being restored not as an idea, but as a lived experience. You trust that when action is needed, it will arise. You trust that when rest is needed, it too has purpose. You trust the pauses. You trust the unfolding. You trust yourself in a way that no external achievement ever taught you. There is a softness that enters your life here. Not weakness, but spaciousness. You stop pushing against your own timing. You stop interpreting stillness as failure. You stop demanding that every moment justify itself. And in that surrender, a deeper intelligence takes the lead. You feel guided without being controlled. You feel held without being restricted. You feel alive without needing to prove it. The mind may still ask from time to time, where is this all going? And the soul responds not with a destination, but with an invitation. Stay here, stay awake, stay open. Because life is not something you arrive at, it is something you participate in, breath by breath, moment by moment. When you stop racing toward a future version of yourself, you discover the quiet miracle of already being home. This is where joy becomes simpler and deeper. Not the joy of winning or achieving, but the joy of alignment, the joy of feeling at ease in your own being, the joy of moving when movement comes and resting when rest calls, without guilt, without resistance, without explanation. You are no longer driven by the need to escape yourself. You are finally willing to inhabit yourself fully. And perhaps the most beautiful realization of all begins to surface. Life has never been withholding purpose from you. Purpose was never missing. It was waiting for you to stop chasing it long enough to feel it. It lives in your presence, in your kindness, in your willingness to meet each moment without armor. It lives in the quiet decisions that honor truth over image, peace over pressure, love over fear. So if motivation no longer looks the way it used to, bless that change. It means you are no longer living from lack. It means you are no longer fueled by the belief that something essential is absent. You are learning a new way of being moved, one that arises from wholeness rather than hunger, one that flows from awareness rather than anxiety. And as you continue walking this path gently, honestly, you will notice that life keeps responding. Doors open without force. Conversations deepen without effort. Opportunities appear not because you chase them, but because you are ready to receive them. You move forward, not because you are afraid of standing still, but because something true is expressing itself through you. This is not the end of motivation. It is its transformation. It is motivation purified of fear, purified of ego, purified of the endless demand to become someone else. What remains is a quiet, steady movement of life through you, guided by wisdom older than thought, kinder than judgment, and infinitely patient. And in that movement, you discover the deepest freedom of all, the freedom to be exactly where you are, exactly as you are, while life continues to unfold through you in perfect, intelligent order. There is a quiet misunderstanding that lives in the human mind, and it is the belief that what is not happening right now is somehow being withheld, delayed, denied, or forgotten. The mind measures life in minutes and months, in calendars and clocks, in effort and visible progress. The soul measures life in alignment. And God, whatever name you give to that infinite intelligence that breathes through you, does not move according to urgency, impatience, or fear. God moves according to harmony. And harmony, when it arrives all at once. You see, the universe does not crawl. It does not inch forward. It does not hesitate. What appears slow is not life itself, but the resistance we place in front of it. Like a river blocked by stones of doubt and worry, the flow does not disappear, it waits. And the moment the stones are lifted, The water rushes through with a force that feels sudden, miraculous, even shocking to the human mind. But to life itself, it was never delayed. It was simply waiting for permission. There is a profound peace that comes when you realize that God is not testing you with time, not teasing you with delay, not punishing you with silence. What you call waiting is often preparation. What you call stagnation is often recalibration. What you call being stuck is frequently the soul whispering, slow down, soften, stop forcing, stop gripping, stop demanding that life bend to your fear-based schedule. Because the moment you release the need to control how and when, the universe demonstrates just how swiftly it can rearrange everything. Think of how quickly fear can arise. One thought, one memory, one imagined future, and the body tightens instantly. If fear can move that fast, why do you believe love moves slowly? If anxiety can flood your nervous system in seconds, why do you doubt that grace can do the same? The only difference is that fear is allowed instantly, while trust is negotiated, questioned, delayed. And yet trust, once chosen, has a velocity that the mind cannot comprehend. God does not require years to heal a heart, decades to open a door, lifetimes to realign your path. The mind tells you that change must be incremental, earned through struggle, paid for with exhaustion. But the soul knows another truth. Alignment is instantaneous. The moment you see clearly, the moment you soften, the moment you stop arguing with what is, everything begins to shift, sometimes quietly, sometimes invisibly, and sometimes so fast it leaves you breathless. What slows divine movement is not circumstance. It is attachment. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to how it should look. Attachment to who you think you need to be before life can bless you. Attachment to proving, fixing, forcing, managing. The ego thrives on control because control gives the illusion of safety. But control is not safety. Control is fear dressed up as responsibility. And fear constricts the flow of life like a clenched fist trying to hold water. When you relax the grip, the water pours through effortlessly. There is a moment in every life when striving becomes heavier than surrender. When effort feels more exhausting than trust. When pushing no longer feels productive but painful. That moment is not failure. That moment is the invitation. The invitation to stop trying to outrun divine timing and instead step into divine alignment. Because divine timing is not about waiting longer. It is about waiting differently. It is about allowing instead of forcing. Listening instead of demanding. Trusting instead of chasing. The soul does not panic about the future. It knows. It always knows. It knows that life is intelligent, responsive, and precise beyond anything the thinking mind can orchestrate. It knows that what is meant for you is not lost, delayed, or denied. It is held in perfect readiness, waiting for you to meet it, not with desperation, but with openness, not with tension, but with calm expectancy. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not being punished. You are being guided. And guidance does not shout. It whispers. It nudges. It gently closes doors that would have required you to abandon yourself. It delays paths that would have cost you your peace. It reroutes you away from outcomes that looked right to the ego but wrong to the soul. And here's the great paradox. The more you trust, the faster things move. The less you cling, the quicker clarity arrives. The moment you stop asking, why isn't this happening yet? And start asking, what is life teaching me to release right now? Everything accelerates. Because release is the key that unlocks momentum. God moves fastest when you stop interfering. This does not mean you become passive. It means you become present. It means you act from alignment rather than anxiety. It means your thoughts slow down, your breath deepens, your nervous system softens, and in that softened state, inspiration can finally reach you. Not forced action, inspired action. The kind of action that feels obvious in hindsight. The kind of action that requires less effort because it is carried by the current rather than pushed against it. Notice how often your mind tries to calculate outcomes, how it rehearses conversations that have not happened, how it prepares for disappointments that may never come, how it clings to timelines that were never promised. This mental noise is not preparation. It is resistance. And resistance is not strength. It is mistrust. It is the quiet belief that life does not know what it is doing unless you supervise it. But life has been arranging galaxies, seasons, heartbeats, and breath long before you learned to worry. The same intelligence that moves the stars is breathing you, and that intelligence does not need reminders, ultimatums, or panic-driven planning. It responds to clarity. It responds to coherence. It responds to the state of being you are embodying far more than the words you are speaking. When your inner world becomes calm, aligned, and receptive, the outer world reorganizes with astonishing speed. Doors open that logic cannot explain. Conversations happen at the exact moment you are ready to hear them. Opportunities appear without struggle. Solutions arrive without force. Not because you earned them through exhaustion, but because you stopped blocking them with fear. You were never meant to muscle your way into destiny. Destiny unfolds when you stop wrestling with the present moment, when you accept where you are, without resignation, without bitterness, without self-blame. Acceptance is not giving up. Acceptance is aligning with reality so fully that reality can finally move you forward. There are no justified resentments in the eyes of the soul. Resentment is simply the refusal to let life teach you. Forgiveness, then, is not about excusing the past. It is about freeing the future. Every grievance you release is a weight removed from the flow of divine timing. Every old story you let go of clears space for something new to arrive faster than you thought possible. And this is the great secret the ego cannot understand. God does not respond to pleading. God responds to alignment. Not to urgency, but to trust. Not to control, but to coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, and intentions settle into harmony, life does not hesitate. It moves with speed, precision, and grace that feels miraculous only because you have forgotten how natural it is. The universe is not slow. You have simply been gripping too tightly. Let yourself loosen. Let yourself rest in the knowing that what is meant for you is already on its way, not trudging, not delayed, but poised, waiting for you to stop bracing against life and start dancing with it. The moment resistance ends, momentum begins. The moment trust begins, timing collapses. What felt impossible becomes inevitable. What felt far away arrives suddenly. What felt blocked dissolves without effort. You do not understand how fast God can move, not because it is mysterious, but because the mind has been trained to expect struggle. The soul, however, has always known. When you align, life accelerates. When you trust, the path clears. When you stop forcing outcomes and start allowing, everything rearranges itself with breathtaking speed. And in that moment, you realize the truth that was always there. Nothing was ever wrong. Nothing was ever late. You were simply being prepared to receive what arrives, not through force, but through grace. And so the breath deepens, not as an effort, but as a remembrance. A remembering that you were never meant to live in a state of bracing, always leaning forward into some imagined future, always scanning for signs that life is finally about to cooperate. Cooperation was never missing. Presence was. And presence is not something you achieve, it is something you stop abandoning. The moment you stop leaving yourself, life stops delaying its gifts. There is a subtle exhaustion that comes from trying to predict what cannot be controlled. It is the fatigue of a mind that believes safety comes from anticipation rather than trust. Yet safety has never lived in prediction. It lives in alignment. It lives in the quiet confidence that you are being carried by something far wiser than your strategies, far more patient than your fears, far more precise than your plans. When you rest into that knowing, the body softens, the heart opens, and the signal you send to life changes entirely. Life is always listening, not to your words, but to your state of being. It listens to the tone beneath your thoughts, the frequency beneath your actions, the intention beneath your desires. When those are tangled in fear, life responds cautiously, gently, waiting for you to feel safe enough to receive. When those are clear, calm, and coherent, life responds swiftly because there is nothing left to protect you from. You were never meant to chase clarity. Clarity emerges when the noise subsides. And noise is not just sound, it is mental, arguing with what is, emotional resistance to what has been, and spiritual impatience with what is unfolding. As the arguing ends, clarity rises like mist lifting from a lake. Suddenly, what felt confusing feels obvious. What felt heavy feels manageable. What felt distant feels near. Not because something external changed, but because you finally stopped obstructing your own perception. There is a tenderness to divine timing that the ego often misinterprets as indifference. But tenderness is not absence, it is care. It is the way life waits until your nervous system is ready to hold what is coming without collapsing into fear or sabotaging it with doubt. Some doors do not open early because you would have walked through them carrying wounds that would have distorted everything inside. Some blessings wait not because you are unworthy, but because you are still learning how to receive without flinching. Receiving is an art the soul understands, but the ego resists. The ego believes it must prove, earn, justify. The soul knows that worthiness is not conditional. And when you begin to live from that knowing, not as a concept, but as a felt truth, life responds immediately. Opportunities appear where there were none. Support arrives from unexpected directions. Answers surface without being hunted. The speed is not frantic. It is elegant. It is precise. It is unmistakable. Notice how often the mind equates stillness with stagnation. Yet stillness is the womb of creation. It is where alignment is born. It is where scattered energy gathers itself into coherence. When you stop rushing, you stop scattering. When you stop scattering, you become powerful. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind of power that does not announce itself, but moves mountains without spectacle. You do not need to convince life of your readiness. Readiness is not a performance, it is a state, and states shift faster than circumstances. The instant your inner posture changes from gripping to allowing, from bracing to trusting circumstances, reorganize in response. The outer world is always downstream from the inner one. This is not metaphor. It is law, a law as reliable as gravity, as impartial as breath. And here is where grace enters, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence. Grace is what flows when resistance dissolves. Grace is not dramatic, it is efficient, it wastes nothing. It bypasses unnecessary struggle. It finds the shortest path between intention and manifestation. When you align with it, life does not move slowly to test you, it moves quickly to meet you. There is a quiet joy in realizing that you no longer need to rush yourself. That urgency was never guidance, it was fear. Guidance feels different. It feels calm, steady, grounded. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not say, hurry or else. It says this way, when you are ready. And readiness, again, is not about time. It is about trust. As trust deepens, the future loosens its grip on your attention. You stop living ahead of yourself. You return to the only place where power has ever lived, this moment. And in this moment, you are not lacking, you are not unfinished, you are not behind, you are whole. From wholeness, creation is immediate. From lack, creation is delayed. Life mirrors the assumption you hold about yourself. This is why healing begins within, not as a task, but as a release. Healing is the decision to stop carrying stories that no longer serve your becoming. It is the willingness to let the past remain where it belongs, complete, instructive, but no longer authoritative. Each story you loosen shortens the distance between where you are and what is ready to arrive. And slowly, gently, without fanfare, you begin to notice something remarkable. The sense of waiting fades, not because everything has happened, but because you are no longer arguing with the unfolding. The anxiety that once accompanied uncertainty gives way to a quiet curiosity. You become interested rather than afraid, open rather than guarded, and in that openness, life moves freely. What once felt like effort begins to feel like cooperation. What once felt like struggle begins to feel like guidance. What once felt impossible begins to feel inevitable, not because you forced it into being, but because you finally aligned with the current that was always carrying you. This is the speed of God, not rushed, not frantic, but instantaneous when invited. It is the speed of alignment, the velocity of trust, the elegance of surrender. And it has always been available to you, waiting patiently for the moment you stop trying to control the river and allow yourself to be carried home. And as you are carried, something within you begins to recognize itself again. Not the version shaped by expectation or comparison, but the quiet essence that existed before you learned to measure your life against outcomes. This recognition does not arrive as a revelation that shakes the ground. It arrives as a soft certainty, a steady inner yes that requires no explanation. You feel it in the way your breath settles, in the way your shoulders release, in the way your mind stops rehearsing disasters that never come. There is a deep intelligence in ease. The world has taught you to distrust it, to believe that if something feels natural, it must be fragile or undeserved. But the soul knows better. Ease is not weakness. Ease is alignment. When something is aligned, it does not resist itself. It moves with grace because grace is simply life unopposed. And when your inner world becomes less opposed to what is, the outer world has nothing to push against. You begin to see that many of the delays you feared were not blocks but buffers. They slowed you just enough to prevent you from stepping into versions of your future that would have required you to shrink, harden, or abandon your truth. What looked like a closed door was often a protection. What felt like rejection was frequently redirection. And when you stop interpreting life through the lens of threat, you start to see the exquisite care woven into every pause. There is a moment when striving quietly exhausts itself, not dramatically, not with collapse, but with clarity. You realize that pushing harder has not brought peace, only tension. That forcing outcomes has not created security, only fatigue. And in that realization, something ancient inside you exhales. You stop trying to outrun uncertainty and allow it to become spacious. And space is where possibility breathes. Possibility does not shout. It waits. It waits for you to stop gripping the known long enough to let the unknown speak. The unknown is not empty. It is fertile. It is the field from which every transformation arises. But the mind, trained to equate certainty with safety, resists it. The soul, however, recognizes the unknown as home. It knows that creation requires openness, not guarantees. As you soften into this understanding, your relationship with time begins to change. Time no longer feels like an adversary withholding what you want. It becomes a rhythm, a dance between readiness and arrival. You stop asking how long and start noticing how aligned. And alignment, once achieved, does not require waiting. It triggers movement. Immediate, precise, unforced movement. There is a sacred efficiency to the way life responds when you are no longer divided within yourself. When your thoughts stop arguing with your feelings, when your desires stop fighting your fears, when your intentions stop contradicting your self-image, everything accelerates. Division slows creation. Coherence hastens it. This is why inner work is not optional, it is catalytic. You are not meant to carry the weight of constant self-correction. The belief that you must continuously fix yourself to deserve a better life is one of the most exhausting illusions the ego perpetuates. Growth does not come from relentless self-judgment. It comes from self-acceptance so complete that change becomes natural rather than forced. When you stop treating yourself as a problem, life stops responding as if something is wrong. And so compassion enters not as sentimentality but as wisdom. Compassion for your past, for your missteps, for the ways you tried to survive before you knew how to trust. This compassion is not backward-looking, it is liberating. It dissolves the inner friction that kept you tethered to old timelines. And when those timelines dissolve, the future is free to reorganize itself with astonishing speed. You begin to notice how quickly inspiration replaces anxiety, how solutions arise without struggle, how conversations unfold with ease, how decisions feel lighter, clearer, less burdened by second-guessing. This is not luck. This is alignment expressing itself. Life is not suddenly being generous. It is responding to a state of openness that finally allows generosity to land. There is no rush in this flow, yet nothing is delayed. The paradox resolves itself when you realize that urgency was never the engine of creation, presence was. And presence is not something you do, it is something you stop interrupting. The more fully you inhabit the moment, the less fragmented your energy becomes. And focused energy moves fast. You start to trust not just outcomes, but the process itself. You trust the pauses. You trust the quiet seasons. You trust the spaces between decisions. You trust that nothing essential is being withheld. This trust is not blind. It is informed by experience, by the realization that every time you let go just a little more, life met you with something better than what you were trying to force. And so the journey continues, not as a race toward a finish line, but as a deepening relationship with the intelligence that animates you. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. You are living it fully, softly, aligned. And in that alignment, you feel the unmistakable truth. When you are ready, life does not hesitate. It moves swiftly, precisely, and with a grace that feels like remembering who you have always been. And eventually, without effort, without announcement, you arrive at a knowing that does not need reassurance, a knowing that settles into you like dusk, gentle and inevitable. You realize that nothing in your life was ever meant to be rushed into existence. It was meant to be welcomed. And welcoming requires open hands, not clenched ones. You feel the shift, not as excitement, but as peace. A deep peace that tells you there is nothing you need to chase to be complete, nothing you need to prove to be chosen, nothing you need to fix to be loved by life itself. The striving falls away because it no longer makes sense. Why strain against a current that is already carrying you? In this stillness, you sense how profoundly supported you have always been, even in moments that felt lonely, even in seasons that felt barren, even when the path disappeared and all you could do was breathe and hope. Support was there, not removing the lesson, not bypassing the growth, but holding you steady while you learned how to trust yourself again. You begin to see that trust was never about believing something good would happen someday. Trust was about resting in the truth that whatever unfolds is part of your awakening, that nothing is random, that nothing is wasted, that every experience, when met with presence, refines rather than diminishes you. And with that realization, something remarkable occurs. You stop waiting for permission to be at peace. You stop postponing joy until conditions improve. You stop telling yourself that life will begin once everything makes sense. Life is happening now. Grace is happening now. Alignment is happening now. And from this moment forward, everything responds differently because you are responding differently. There is no grand finale to this understanding, no dramatic conclusion, only a quiet return to yourself. To the part of you that always knew that life is intelligent, responsive, and kind when met without fear. To the part of you that remembers that surrender is not collapse, it is cooperation with something infinitely wiser than control. You move forward not with certainty, but with confidence. Not with guarantees, but with trust. And trust, you discover, is faster than fear ever was. It clears paths. It opens doors. It dissolves obstacles before they harden. When you trust, you do not wait long for evidence. Evidence arrives because trust removes the need for delay. This is how fast God can move. Not because something outside of you suddenly decides to act, but because something within you finally gets out of the way. The moment you align, the moment you soften, the moment you allow life to be as intelligent as it is, everything shifts. And you walk on, not hurried, not hesitant, but grounded in the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you need to be, that what is meant for you knows how to find you, that timing is not working against you, but with you, always. You are not late, you are not forgotten, you are not stalled, you are becoming. And in that becoming, you realize the most liberating truth of all. Life has been waiting not for your effort, but for your trust.